I've been driving for Uber for about 2 years now, mostly doing the night shift because the money is better and there's less traffic to deal with. I thought I'd seen it all. Drunk college kids, people having breakdowns, the occasional weirdo who wants to talk about conspiracy theories for 30 minutes. But what happened last month still keeps me awake at night. It was around 2:30 a.m. on a Tuesday when I got a pickup request from downtown. The pickup location was outside an old apartment building, the kind that's been there since the 1960s, and looks like it's barely holding together. When I pulled up, I didn't see anyone waiting, which isn't unusual. People sometimes take a few minutes to come down. After about 3 minutes, my passenger door opened and someone got in. I looked in my rearview mirror to greet them, but I couldn't make out their face clearly. They were wearing a dark hoodie that cast shadows across their features, and they spoke in a whisper when they gave me the address. The destination was way out in the suburbs, about a 40-minute drive. I started the trip and pulled away from the curb. My passenger didn't say anything else, just sat in the back seat completely still. I tried to make small talk a couple times, but they didn't respond, so I gave up and focused on driving. About 15 minutes into the trip, I glanced in my rearview mirror again, and something was wrong. I couldn't see my passenger anymore. The back seat looked empty, but I could hear breathing coming from behind me, slow, steady breathing like someone was sleeping. I pulled over at a gas station and turned around to check the back seat. There was no one there. The seat was empty, but it still felt warm like someone had just been sitting in it. I got out and checked around my car, thinking maybe they had somehow gotten out without me noticing, but there was no one around. I called the number from the ride request, but it went straight to a disconnected message. I tried to end the trip in the app, but it wouldn't let me. According to the app, my passenger was still in the car and we were still heading to the destination. I sat in that gas station parking lot for 20 minutes trying to figure out what to do. Finally, I decided to drive to the destination address, thinking maybe it was some kind of app glitch and completing the trip would fix it. The address led me to an empty lot. There was nothing there except weeds and a rusty fence. But as soon as I arrived, the app automatically completed the trip and charged the passenger's card. I got a 5-star rating and a $10 tip. I drove straight home after that and haven't worked past midnight since. I still have no idea who or what got into my car that night, but I know I wasn't alone during that drive. I work the overnight desk at a small hotel downtown. It's not a fancy place, just a budget hotel that mostly serves business travelers and people passing through town. The pay isn't great, but it's easy work most nights. I check people in, handle any complaints, and make sure no one who isn't supposed to be there gets past the lobby. The hotel has been around since the 1980s, and like a lot of older buildings, it has its quirks. The elevator makes weird noises, some of the room doors stick, and the heating system sounds like it's having an argument with itself. I'd gotten used to all of that after working there for 8 months, but room 237 was different. It was the only room on the second floor that we never booked. My manager told me it was because of plumbing issues, but the maintenance guy said the plumbing was fine. When I asked other employees about it, they would just change the subject. The first time I heard something from room 237, I thought it was just the old building settling. It was around 3 a.m., and I was doing my hourly walk through the hallways when I heard what sounded like a TV playing. There was a faint blue glow coming from under the door, and I could hear voices having a conversation. I knocked on the door to let whoever was inside know that the room wasn't supposed to be occupied. The voices stopped immediately, and the blue glow disappeared. I used my master key to open the door, but the room was empty. No TV, no guests, nothing. The room hadn't been cleaned in weeks, and there was a layer of dust on everything. Over the next few weeks, I kept hearing things from room 237. Sometimes it was the TV, sometimes it sounded like someone was taking a shower, and once I could swear I heard a phone ringing inside. But every time I checked, the room was empty. The really disturbing part was that I started getting complaints from guests in the rooms next to 237. They said there was loud talking and laughing coming through the walls all night. When I would go check, I never heard anything, and room 237 was always empty. One night I decided to camp out in the hallway and wait to see what would happen. I brought a chair and positioned myself where I could see the door to room 237. Around 2:45 a.m., I heard the sound of the door opening, but I was looking right at it and it didn't move. Then I heard footsteps in the hallway, like someone had left the room and was walking toward the elevator. I followed the footsteps with my eyes, but I couldn't see anyone. The footsteps stopped at the elevator, and I heard the button being pressed. The elevator arrived, the doors opened, and I heard them close again. According to the floor indicator, the elevator went down to the lobby. I ran downstairs to check the lobby cameras, but they showed nothing. No one had gotten off the elevator, but as I was watching the monitor, I saw the elevator going back up to the second floor. I quit 2 weeks later. My replacement lasted 3 days before she requested a transfer to the day shift. The hotel management finally decided to seal room 237 permanently, but I heard from a former co-worker that guests still complain about the noise. Working at a 24-hour gas station taught me that the world gets really weird after 2 a.m. You see all kinds of people, shift workers grabbing coffee, insomniacs buying energy drinks, and the occasional person who clearly shouldn't be driving. But there was one customer who still gives me chills when I think about him. He started coming in around the same time every night, usually between 3:15 and 3:30 a.m. Always bought the exact same things: a pack of cigarettes, a bottle of water, and a bag of chips. He paid in cash, never said more than a few words, and left immediately after his purchase. What made him memorable wasn't what he bought, but how he looked. He was probably in his 50s, average height, but there was something off about his appearance. His clothes always looked damp, like he'd been caught in the rain, even on clear nights. His hair was wet too, and sometimes water would drip onto the counter when he leaned forward to pay. After about 2 weeks of seeing him regularly, I started paying more attention to the security cameras. I wanted to see where he came from and how he got to the store. But here's the weird part. The outside cameras never showed him approaching the building. One moment the parking lot would be empty, and the next moment he would be walking through the front door. I thought maybe there was a blind spot in the camera coverage, so I started watching more carefully. But no matter how closely I monitored the outside feeds, I never saw him arrive. He would just appear inside the store, make his purchase, and leave. And just like his arrival, the cameras never showed him walking away. One night I decided to follow him outside to see where he went. As soon as he left the store, I walked to the front windows and looked out into the parking lot. He was nowhere to be seen. I went outside and walked around the entire building, but there was no sign of him anywhere. The next night I asked him about it. When he came to the counter to pay, I said, "I'm curious. How do you get here every night? I never see you pull up in a car." He looked at me for a long moment with these pale blue eyes that seemed unfocused, like he was looking through me rather than at me. Then he said, "I don't drive anymore. Haven't for about 15 years. His voice was strange, kind of hollow and distant. I asked him how he got to the store then, but he just picked up his items and walked toward the door without answering. I watched the security footage from that night over and over. The conversation was clearly recorded, but something was wrong with the video. Whenever the man spoke, his mouth movements didn't match the words I heard. It was like watching a badly dubbed movie. He stopped coming after that night. I worked at that gas station for 6 more months, but I never saw him again. I asked some of the other employees if they remembered him, but no one knew who I was talking about. According to them, I was the only one who had ever seen him. I've been working as a nurse for 12 years, but this was my first job doing overnight shifts in a hospital. The pay was significantly better than day shifts, and I needed the money, so I took the position even though I'd heard that night shifts could be challenging. St. Mary's Hospital was an older building, probably built in the 1970s, and it had that institutional feel that all hospitals seem to have. My floor was the medical surgical unit, with 36 beds for patients recovering from various procedures. During night shifts, the floor was usually quiet, with most patients sleeping and minimal staff on duty. The problem started during my 3rd week, when I began noticing discrepancies in our patient count. According to the computer system, we had 28 patients on the floor, but when I did my room-by-room count, I consistently came up with 29. There was always one extra person somewhere. At first, I thought I was miscounting or that there was an error in the computer system. But it happened every night, and I was always careful to double-check my work. I mentioned it to my supervisor, but she said the computer system was accurate and that I was probably just tired. The issue came to a head on a Thursday night when I was doing my 3 a.m. medication rounds. I was pushing my cart down the hallway when I saw a patient sitting in a wheelchair near the nurse's station. He was an elderly man in a hospital gown, and he appeared to be waiting for something. I approached him to ask if he needed assistance, but when I got closer, I realized I didn't recognize him. I knew all of our patients by sight, and this man wasn't one of them. I checked his wristband, but it was blank. No name, no patient ID number, nothing. I asked him what his name was and what room he was staying in, but he didn't respond. He just stared straight ahead with a blank expression. I tried to get his attention by waving my hand in front of his face, but he didn't react at all. I went to the nurse's station to check our patient list, thinking maybe he was a new admission that I hadn't been told about. But according to our records, we hadn't had any new patients in over 6 hours. I called security to help me figure out who this man was and how he had gotten onto our floor. When I turned around to point out the patient to the security guard, the wheelchair was empty. The man was gone. We searched the entire floor, checked every room, and looked at all the security cameras, but there was no sign of him anywhere. The security guard suggested that maybe I had imagined the whole thing, that the stress of working night shifts was getting to me. But I know what I saw. That man was real, and he was sitting in that wheelchair for at least 5 minutes. After that night, I started seeing him regularly, always in different locations around the floor, always in a wheelchair, always unresponsive when I tried to talk to him. Other staff members never saw him, and the cameras never picked him up, but he was there almost every night. I transferred to day shift after 2 months. I told my supervisor it was for personal reasons, but the truth was that I couldn't handle seeing that mysterious patient anymore. I still don't know who he was or why only I could see him, but I'm convinced he was someone who had died on that floor and couldn't find his way out. I started working for a delivery service about 6 months ago, mostly doing evening and late night deliveries because the tips are better and there's less competition from other drivers. The job is pretty straightforward. Pick up food from restaurants and deliver it to customers' homes. Most of the time it's completely routine, but there was one delivery that I'll never forget, and it's made me much more careful about which orders I accept, especially late at night. The order came in around 11:30 p.m. on a Saturday. It was a large order from a Chinese restaurant, probably $60 worth of food, going to an address about 15 minutes away in a residential neighborhood. The delivery instructions said to leave the food on the front porch and ring the doorbell. I picked up the order and drove to the address using my GPS. The neighborhood was older, with large houses set back from the street and big yards with lots of trees. It was the kind of area where the houses are spaced far apart and you can't see your neighbors very well. When I arrived at the address, I noticed that the house was completely dark. No porch lights, no interior lights, nothing. This wasn't unusual for late-night deliveries since some people prefer to keep their lights off, but something about this particular house felt wrong. I walked up to the front door with the food and rang the doorbell as instructed. I waited for a few minutes, but no one came to the door. I tried knocking, but still no response. I called the customer's phone number, but it went straight to voicemail. Following company policy, I left the food on the porch and took a photo to confirm the delivery. But as I was walking back to my car, I heard the front door open behind me. I turned around and saw someone standing in the doorway, but I couldn't make out any details because they were backlit by the interior of the house. The person called out, "Thank you," in a voice that sounded strange, like they were speaking through something that muffled their words. I waved and got in my car, thinking the delivery was complete. But as I was driving away, I realized something was wrong. When the door had opened, I should have seen light from inside the house, but the interior had been just as dark as the exterior. Whoever had opened the door was standing in complete darkness. I decided to drive back and check on the situation. When I returned to the house, the food was still sitting on the porch, and the house was dark again. I knocked on the door and called out, but no one answered. I called my dispatcher to report the strange situation, and she suggested that I had probably delivered to the wrong address. She gave me the address again, and I double-checked it against my GPS. I was definitely at the right place. The next morning, I looked up the address online out of curiosity. According to the county records, the house had been vacant for over 2 years. The previous owner had died, and the property was tied up in legal proceedings with no one living there. I tried to find out who had placed the order, but the customer account had been deleted from our system. The phone number was disconnected, and the credit card used for payment had been reported stolen 3 days earlier. I still have no idea who ordered that food or who opened the door that night, but I'm certain that someone or something was in that empty house, waiting in the darkness for a delivery that should never have been made. I work overnight security at a downtown office building with a 5-level parking garage underneath. My job is pretty simple: patrol the building and garage every 2 hours, monitor the security cameras, and make sure no one breaks in. The garage is supposed to be empty after 8 p.m. when all the office workers go home. The parking garage has always creeped me out, even during my first week on the job. It's one of those older garages with low ceilings and dim lighting that creates lots of shadows between the concrete pillars. During the day it's busy and feels normal, but at night it becomes this maze of dark corners where anything could be hiding. About 3 months into the job, I started noticing cars in the garage that weren't supposed to be there. I would do my patrol at 11 p.m. and find the garage completely empty, but when I came back at 1 a.m., there would be a car parked on one of the lower levels. The first time it happened, I thought maybe someone was working late and I had missed their car during my earlier round. But when I checked the keycard logs, no one had entered the building or garage after closing time. According to our system, the garage was empty, but there was definitely a car sitting in space B47. I approached the car to check if anyone was inside. It was an older sedan, dark blue or black, and the windows were tinted so I couldn't see into the interior. I knocked on the driver's side window and called out to see if anyone was there, but there was no response. I wrote down the license plate number and called it in to my supervisor. He told me to check if the car was locked and to look for any identification inside if possible. I tried the door handle, and the car was unlocked, which immediately made me more suspicious. I opened the driver's door and looked inside. The car was completely empty. No personal items, no registration in the glove compartment, nothing that would tell me who owned it. But there was something strange about the interior. The seats and steering wheel were damp, like someone had been sitting in the car with wet clothes. When I went back to check on the car an hour later, it was gone. I reviewed the security camera footage, but the cameras in that section of the garage weren't working properly. All I could see was static during the time period when the car should have been there. This started happening regularly, maybe 2 or 3 times a week. Always the same car, always in a different parking space, always damp inside when I checked it. And it would always disappear before my next patrol round. The really disturbing part was that I started hearing the car running even when I couldn't see it. I would be walking through the garage and hear the sound of an engine idling somewhere in the darkness. But when I followed the sound, I never found anything. One night, I decided to stake out the garage and see if I could catch whoever was bringing the car in. I positioned myself on the 5th level, where I had a view of the entrance ramp, and waited. Around 2:30 a.m., I heard the sound of a car engine echoing through the garage. I looked down and saw headlights moving slowly up the ramp from the street level. The car was moving unusually slowly, like the driver was being very careful not to make noise. I watched as it reached the 2nd level and parked in the same area where I usually found it. The headlights turned off, but I never saw anyone get out of the car. I waited for 15 minutes, but the driver's door never opened. Finally, I took the elevator down to the 2nd level to investigate. When I got there, the car was empty and the engine was off, but the hood was still warm and I could smell exhaust fumes. The driver's seat was soaking wet, and there were puddles of water on the floor mat. But there was no sign of whoever had been driving. I quit that job 2 weeks later. My replacement told me he's never seen any mysterious cars in the garage, but I sometimes drive by the building late at night, and I can still see headlights moving through the parking garage, even though it's supposed to be empty. I took a job working overnight inventory at a large warehouse on the outskirts of town. The pay was good, and the work was straightforward, just counting stock and updating computer records. The warehouse stored electronics and appliances for a regional distributor, so it was full of TVs, refrigerators, and other large items stacked on metal shelving that went up 20 feet high. The warehouse was massive, probably the size of 2 football fields, and during the night shift, I was usually the only person there. My supervisor would leave around 6 p.m., and the day crew wouldn't arrive until 7 a.m., so I had 13 hours of complete solitude to get through my work. I didn't mind being alone at first. I brought headphones and listened to podcasts while I worked, and the time passed quickly. The warehouse had good lighting and a decent security system, so I felt safe enough working by myself. But after about a month, I started hearing sounds that didn't make sense. The warehouse was filled with industrial equipment, forklifts, conveyor belts, and automated systems that moved inventory around during the day. All of this equipment was supposed to be shut down during the night shift, but I kept hearing machines running. The first time it happened, I thought maybe something had been left on by mistake. I spent 20 minutes walking around the warehouse, trying to find the source of the mechanical humming, but I couldn't locate it. The sound seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. I called my supervisor to ask if any equipment was supposed to be running at night, but he assured me that everything should be powered down. He suggested that maybe I was hearing the building's heating system or some other background noise that I wasn't used to yet, but the sounds got more frequent and more obvious. I would hear forklifts starting up and moving around, beeping as they backed up, and the hydraulic whine of their lifting mechanisms. I would hear conveyor belts running and the mechanical sounds of the automated sorting system in operation. Whenever I went to investigate, I found all the equipment properly shut down and unplugged. The forklifts were parked in their charging stations, the conveyor belts were motionless, and the sorting system was dark and silent. But I could still hear the sounds of a fully operational warehouse coming from somewhere in the building. The situation escalated when I started seeing the equipment actually moving. I would be working in one section of the warehouse when I would see a forklift driving down an aisle in my peripheral vision. When I turned to look directly at it, the forklift would be parked exactly where it was supposed to be, but I was certain I had just seen it moving. This happened more and more frequently until I felt like I was working in a warehouse that was operating at full capacity, even though I knew I was the only person there. I would see forklifts moving inventory, conveyor belts carrying boxes, and workers in safety vests walking between the shelves. But whenever I looked directly at any of it, the warehouse would be empty and silent. The final incident happened during my last week at that job. I was working near the back of the warehouse when I heard someone calling my name. It was a man's voice, and he sounded like he needed help with something urgent. I called back, asking where he was and what he needed, but the voice just kept calling my name from different locations around the warehouse. I followed the voice, but I never found anyone. The calling continued for about 10 minutes, seeming to come from all around me, but I remained completely alone. I walked out that night and never went back. I didn't even pick up my final paycheck. My supervisor called a few times asking what had happened, but I couldn't bring myself to explain the situation. How do you tell someone that you were working in a warehouse full of ghost workers, operating invisible equipment? I later found out that the warehouse had been the site of a fatal accident 3 years before I was hired. A worker had been crushed by a forklift during the night shift, and there had been questions about whether proper safety procedures were being followed. The company had paid a large settlement to the victim's family, but they never admitted any wrongdoing.